So I'm going to get started so that we don't run too far behind time. So thank you everybody for coming to our HSS virtual symposium. When the COVID-19 closure began, it became very important for us to retain this space that was first scheduled to be in person for a virtual space where we could highlight the incredible creative academic energy of our undergraduate and graduate students. And we were so pleasantly pleased, weird phrasing on my part, that so many students were still eager to, despite some of the chaos that was caused in their life, but so eager to still share their studies and their research with us. And wow, we are up to a lot of participants too on this webinar. So that shows you how excited we are all to hear your research. So our first presenter of the symposium is Chava Olander. Did I say that? Do you want to say your name? Sorry, I mispronounced. If you can mispronounce anything, I mispronounce it. I'm terrible at pronunciation. Will you say your name?
Of course. Hi, I'm Chava Olander.
Thank you. And she is an undergraduate student in philosophy, and her paper is titled Ethics and Identity, Discussing Homosexuality in Ethical Context. She is going to share her screen with us. If you do have questions during her presentation, please use the question and answer feature. And then at the end of we'll hold all questions until the end of her presentation, and then we will take any questions. All right, over to you. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you for having me. So like I said, I'm Chava, my major is philosophy, and I'll be presenting my project on the topic of ethics and identity, which explores the ethical context for discussing homosexuality. What I'm going to do is draw from two ethical traditions to illustrate that the ethical debate surrounding homosexuality is itself unethical. So first, let's hone in on the purpose of ethics. As a field of study, ethics is the discipline that deals with notions of right and wrong, but what is its practical application? To live ethically is to live in accordance with definitive principles of right and wrong behavior. This is simple enough at face value, but it actually reveals quite a lot about the purpose of ethical principles. It tells us that ethics pertains to action. When we speak of what is right and wrong in the context of ethics, we're dealing with conceptions of right and wrong behavior. Aristotle asserts that ethical living is a matter of choice. He writes, wherever we have the power to do, we also have the power not to do. This illuminates another aspect of ethical living, namely that in order to behave ethically, we must have had the power to do otherwise. And this means that a choice must exist between potential actions in order for an act to be considered ethical or unethical. There are myriad ethical theories, all of which seek to apply specific standards to determining the rightness or wrongness of an action. In general, ethical debate springs from disagreement on which ethical theory, which standards, ought to be used to make these determinations, or from disparate views regarding the application of ethical principles. So if our goal is to set standards for ourselves, individually and collectively, for behavior, we'll find ethical inquiry of use. My meta-ethical concern regarding ethical debate or inquiry is whether there is an ethical way to conduct ethical debate. Each theory of ethics presents a novel standard for defining right conduct, and each contains distinct criteria for evaluating whether a freely chosen act is ethical. Despite vast differences between ethical traditions, the emphasis on voluntary action is intentional, so these theories have no applicability outside this domain. Additionally, whether a theory is built upon determining right action by consequence or by reasoned principle, it is because our behavior impacts others that we need ethics in our lives. Furthermore, not every subject of choice can be held to ethical scrutiny. Matters involving mere personal preference, like one's culinary or musical inclinations, don't fall under the purview of ethics as they pertain exclusively to the individual and have no appreciable bearing on our relationships with others. So what about thoughts? In the same vein, our thoughts exist outside the realm of ethics, and ethical theories take no stance in determining whether a thought is right or wrong, since it is confined to the individual and not apparent to anyone or anything else unless it's acted upon. It's not the contemplation of an act that's of ethical concern, but the act itself. So we've seen that ethical inquiry is not applicable to any matter outside the realm of freely chosen behavior. We can see then how ethical debate about a subject like physician-assisted suicide is appropriate, because it involves an action that impacts others and it's a matter of choice. By contrast, the characteristic of having freckles is not one that can be debated in ethical context, since having freckles is not a choice and doesn't involve a behavior. Similarly, homosexuality is not a behavior and it's not a choice. Instead, it's a biological facet of individual identity. Now, this stipulation might draw criticism, as members of the scientific community don't necessarily agree about the weight of every biological and environmental factor informing aspects of our identity, but this itself is outside the purview of ethics. So to demonstrate the ethical problems posed by making homosexuality the subject of ethical debate, I'll be applying two ethical theories, beginning with Kantian ethics. Kant advocated for the use of reason alone in determining ethical principles. In A Critique of Pure Reason, he stated, "Reason itself contains the origin of certain concepts and principles, which it is not borrowed from the senses or the understanding." The use of reason in the cultivation of ethical precepts for Kant makes use of his first categorical imperative, a principle of universalization which dictates that we must act in a manner that we would desire for everyone to act at all times. Kant did not see ethical principles as relative or situational, but matters of universal law. Given this, the ethical validity of the debate about homosexuality rests on whether it is reasonable to discuss the ethicality of other biological aspects of identity. Debating whether it is ethical to be a homosexual encounters significant difficulty in its universalization. If we determine that homosexuality, the mere recognition that one is sexually attracted to members of their own gender, is a worthy topic for ethical debate, we pave the way for improper ethical consideration of other aspects of identity. It would follow that it could also be acceptable to debate such matters as whether it is ethically permissible to be double-jointed or have green eyes, or to be a woman. This is troubling because in debating ethical issues, the goal is to inform our behavior. The purpose of determining whether an act is ethical or unethical is to empower ourselves to choose ethical action. As a result of an ethical debate, an individual might be swayed in one direction or another, and this would influence their decision should they find themselves in the position to consider taking that specific action. However, there's no choice to be made here, and no action to be taken. Just as one cannot alter their physiology with a mere act of will, one cannot decide to stop being gay. If we would find it unreasonable to entertain an ethical debate on any other biological aspect of identity, we cannot include homosexuality in ethical discussion in this fashion. I'll move now to an application of utilitarian ethics. Utilitarianism is a teleological ethical theory through which the ethicality of an act is determined by calculating the ratio of happiness to suffering for all involved. John Stuart Mill, an originator of utilitarianism, asserted that an act is established as ethical or unethical through utility, or what Mill referred to as the greatest happiness principle. As he stated, actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. Whose happiness are we concerned with here? It's of the utmost importance to ascertain who qualifies as an involved party when employing utilitarianism. In the case of most ethical debate, it could be reasonably asserted that anyone who might perform a given action or stands to be impacted by that action when performed by someone else is effectively involved. In ethical debates surrounding homosexuality, this facet of identity is reduced to a behavior, something that a person does rather than something that a person is. When using utilitarian standards to evaluate whether the debate about homosexuality is ethical, it appears that one segment of the population, homosexuals, suffer disproportionately in relation to any happiness that might be attained through our engaging in lively academic discourse on the topic. That alone need not necessarily divert us, though, because since ethics is concerned with action, the mere fact that a group of individuals will suffer from the knowledge that they are behaving unethically does not trump the actual impact that their behavior has on others. But utilitarianism demonstrates that this debate is unlike a proper ethical debate in which a course of action might be deemed unethical. In such cases, a person who has previously committed the act in question might suffer emotionally at the realization that they had behaved unethically. However, this is outweighed by the insight gain that will prevent them and others from repeating the same behavior in the future. Because homosexuality is a non-voluntary aspect of identity, there's no lesson to be learned that compensates for the undue suffering of this group. What is the course of action if homosexuality is deemed unethical? How does one cease to be what they are? Such a debate has the potential to determine whether or not a specific group of people should exist, which is not at all the function of ethics. To sum up, the position that debating the ethics of homosexuality is unethical rests largely on this premise that homosexuality is a biological aspect of identity and not a choice. While grounded in science, it's not the aim here to provide detailed support for this claim. To debate this a priori premise would require that we leave the realm of ethics and enter the scientific domain. My stance is not that homosexuality transcends any form of debate, but that it is not in itself an appropriate subject for ethical debate. Nor does this position presuppose that homosexuality cannot be tangentially involved in ethical inquiry. There may be room for discussing the ethicality of sex between homosexual people within a larger debate about non-procreative sex. However, this is a debate entirely separate from the one discussed here, and one that ought to focus on the sex acts themselves rather than the homosexual identities of the parties involved. Returning for a moment to Kantian ethics, Kant's second categorical imperative requires that we treat people as ends in themselves and never as a means to an end. In debating homosexuality itself, we effectively reduce homosexual individuals to nothing more than their sexual proclivities. Such a debate is always unethical, whether viewed from Kantian or utilitarian standards, as it potentially makes a value determination not on the rightness or wrongness of an action, but on an individual's very existence. So thank you so much again for having me, and I'm happy to take any questions now if there are any.
Thank you so much for that excellent talk. I'm gonna now open this for questions. So if you have a question, please type it into the question box. I will be selfish then. Since we have people here who are from a lot of different disciplines, can you tell us a little bit about your method and how you approach this project?
Sure. The project was approached by running the debate about homosexuality through various ethical theories. And I've handpicked two that I think are different enough from each other to present today. Just on the grounds that I think it demonstrates how this debate itself can be seen as unethical.
Thank you. I see a raised hand, so I am going to allow Dr. Nichols to talk.
Okay, thanks. It's a lot easier to say this than type it.
Yeah.
Okay. So focusing on the part of the argument about John Stuart Mill's principle of utilitarian principle, here's what I understand, and it comes with two comments. First, so the conclusion is that discussion about the ethical status of being homosexual is itself harmful to homosexuals, and therefore we all have an obligation not to talk about the moral status of homosexuals. But first, I think that's it's not well aligned with what John Stuart Mill says. He's famously in his book on liberty, he's famously an advocate of free speech. So if you're right, Shava, then the worry is that you're actually constraining free speech with this ethical injunction. And second, and related, I'm not sure that that's going to be a plausible inference from his principle, because you could imagine. I mean, notice that argument has very little to do with whether homosexuality is biological or not. So I regard that particular claim. Maybe it's more important for the Kantian side of your argument. For utilitarian, the way you ran the argument, it's just talking about this harms homosexuals, and that triggers Mill's principle, meaning that we have this obligation to not speak about the ethical status of homosexuals. So the reason that's irrelevant to the biological feature of being homosexual. So it leads to an argument by analogy. Suppose that people who practice some horrible thing, like maybe female genital mutilation is something that we all find abhorrent, or maybe murdering people based on their ethnicity is something we find abhorrent. Well, people who do those things themselves we can imagine those people will feel harmed if we talk about the ethical status of those people and their behaviors. But that itself is not a reason for us not to talk about it. So it seems as though by analogy, there might be something wrong with your inference. I'll stop and listen for the answer now.
Sure. So yes, you're absolutely right, which is why I said that that alone need not divert us from an ethical debate about homosexuality. I think the real link to utilitarianism here is that it concerns matters of action. So just as any ethical theory. So when we talk about homosexual identity as a biological facet of identity, I mean, I guess you could say that there is an act of being an identity, but when I think it's not an analogous comparison to bring up female genital mutilation, because those people chose to engage in the act of female genital mutilation. The act of existing as a homosexual is not something that one has a choice in.
Thank you so much. I hate to do this. I would love to hear more of this interchange, but I am already a little bit behind, so I'm going to have to feel free to keep on talking offline. I will put you back in the audience, Ms. Olander, and introduce our next panelist. Thank you again.
Thank you.
All right. Hello, David, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello. Hi.
Hello.
Whoa,
Okay.
man. The Q&A is tough today. Oh, Shava, good job, girl. That Q&A was tough. She did great. She did great.
Yeah, I mean, that's I always respect the philosophy department, and they always I love hearing the interchange, because it's really serious. Like, the faculty and the students, they treat each other as serious interlocutors. So
I love it. I love it.
So this is David Ortuna, and he is a sociology graduate student, and he is going to speak today on the business of diversity, the fiscal crisis of the state, and its impact on Hispanic serving institutions in California higher education. So take it away.
All right. Well, hi, my name is David, and my presentation is titled The Business of Diversity, the Fiscal Crisis of the State and its Impact on Hispanic Serving Institutions. In 1990, tuition to California State University was $700. Tuition to the CSU is currently $7,806, a 7,000% increase. Rising tuition is not the only factor impacting higher education. Decreased federal and state funding for higher education is also affecting schools across the U.S., creating an economic crisis for institutions of higher education. In response to this crisis, universities turn to other sources of funding to generate the necessary revenue to sustain economic growth. These alternate sources include recruiting international students from wealthy families, increasing tuition fees, decreasing professor salaries, and competing for million-dollar grants reserved for Hispanic serving institutions known as HSIs. In California, the current fiscal crisis of the state may be indirectly and intermediately linked to the long-term negative impact of the dismantling of affirmative action, which occurred in 1996. As a result, it is possible that HSRs are being used to supplement the crisis. In this inquiry, I propose that HSIs are primarily used for economic purposes by institutional elites. While HSIs do provide an opportunity for marginalized students to achieve a college degree and pursue the American dream, they also indirectly and immediately perpetuate intergroup racial tension in the following ways. First, by failing to employ a diverse teaching and senior level administrative body that does not proportionately correlate with its student enrollment by race and gender. Second, by allocating more resources to Latinx students at the expense of Black, Pacific Islander, Asian, and American Indian students, resulting in racial exclusion under the premise of diversity and integration. To verify this argument, I will employ quantitative methods to address the following research hypotheses. As the Latinx student population becomes hyperinflated, the number of Black, Pacific Islander, Asian, and American Indians will remain static or decrease. As the resident, non-resident alien student population increases, the number of Black, Pacific Islander, Asian, and American Indians will remain static or decrease. Addressing the above stated hypotheses will enable me to link the fiscal crisis of the state and the cessation of affirmative action in California higher education to the creation and oversaturation of HSIs in the CSU system, and how the convergence of these events appears to have purposefully harmed working class and poor Black, Pacific Islander, Asian, and American Indians. My purpose is to demonstrate how and why diversity and inclusion relating to public policy, integration, and California higher education is a system of oppression. Now, between 1992 to 2019, I looked at the enrollments between these 2 years. I picked 1992 because that's the first year that HSIs came into existence. And for a sample of close to 800,000 students, I found that the white population decreased by almost 31%, the American Indian by almost 1%, the Black population by almost 2%, there was a decrease in the Pacific Islander population, and the Asian population remained unchanged. These all answer my research hypotheses. Now it's great, the Latinx population increased by 31%, but at what cost to the smaller races? And the white population, what is going on? At almost a 31% decrease? More research is needed here. For example, are white students going to school out of state? Are they going to private schools? Are they going to the UC, or are they not pursuing higher education? More research is needed. Also, more research is needed on the non-resident alien population, exactly to determine what percentage of this 3% are wealthy students from China, Korea, Japan, India, England, Germany, Sweden, and Norway. More research is needed. Now, this graph shows the CSU in their pursuit of HSI designation as a system. Proposition 209 in 1996 decreased state funding for higher education. So to supplement the loss of funding, schools started pursuing HSI designation to get money from Title IV and Title V funding from the federal government. And the second wave all the way into 2007. And by 2007, 11 CSUs have pursued the designation. Now you combine the state loss of funding with the federal loss of funding, which was the 2008 US recession. And then the other 10 CSUs and 50% of the UCs joined suit. And I refer to this phenomenon as business of diversity. Now, to be a Hispanic serving institution, 25% of the institution, undergraduate only full-time, needs to be Latinx, according to the federal government. According to the Hispanic Association in colleges and universities, 25% of any population, whether it's a total graduate, an undergraduate, or undergraduate only full-time, part-time. For this sample of 27 million in all three categories, you can see that this institution did not hit until 2007 and 2009. This recession, we started slipping in recession at the end of 2006. So this also answers my hypothesis. And even though the CSU is well over 40% the past 4 years, the mean for this 27 period is only 20 to 28%, which is 11% below the state population as it is right now. As the 29, the Hispanic population makes up 39% in California. The white population makes up 36%, but only 20% of the CSU. And the 30% increase affects the smaller races, Black, American Indian, and Pacific Islander. And so does that 3% increase in the non-resident alien. Now, the great news is that across the country, Hispanics only make up 18%. So there's no need to build a wall. That's ridiculous. Okay. And the white population is fine. They're breeding. They're 60%. So everything is good. Now, when we look at our senior level staff, even though the CSU is 40% Hispanic, the presidents overall, of the 23, well, 12 are female, but of that 12, 58% are white. Now, Proposition 209 made it illegal to hire anyone based on their color. But according to the presidents, it seems like white's the perfect color to pick. So maybe nothing is race neutral. And even though the Hispanic community is 40%, the presidents are not representative at all. In conclusion, in the business of diversity, the institution's main objective is to run an efficient organization by pursuing all forms of capital needed to maintain power, endowments, size, durability, and sustainability. The business of diversity recruits people of color and gender into the institution that draw the most money from federal and state-funded programs centered on diversity and inclusion. That includes becoming a Hispanic serving institution, and then you're eligible to compete for Title IV and Title V funding. Now, DACA students are not eligible for Title IV or Title V funding and are not counted in HSI designation. The second way to do this is when you don't have white students coming to school that pay cash, where you recruit wealthy international students. But as you do that, you turn away eligible Californians. And in the past 22 years since affirmative action was dismantled, over 500,000 fully qualified California applicants have been turned away. How many were white, Black, Pacific Islander, Asian, Filipino, Pacific Islander? Without an official audit of the state, we'll never know. And this was created by Proposition 209. And if you're wondering why we don't have more Black professors or more diverse student senior level or professor body, it's because of Proposition 209. So it affected the students and the professoriate as a communal body of knowledge. Now, the business of diversity permits senior level staff to use forms of media as an emotional tool to market people of color and gender as poor, helpless, impoverished, the ghetto, creating an emotional need to lobby state and federal agencies for more grant money. And the business of diversity generates more money for those who control, work for, and privately invest in the institution, but may not necessarily benefit those who pay to attend or live near the institution. Nevertheless, these people enrich the institution by way of federal, state, and private tax dollars. And on a side note, the CSU graduates the most Hispanic and Black students with college debt in the country. Now, the business of diversity, though, it's great if you're a senior level administrator. Hey, look at our fantastic provost, our president. Donate to Tuffy. These people cry poor mouth that the school doesn't have money, but according to these pay raises, they're doing great. And of course, how about our fantastic chancellor, Mambo? All right, huge pay raises where our lecturers are hardly making any money at all. And the students, the tuition rate is going up, and you just blame it all on Hispanics. After all, it's a Hispanic serving institution. Now, I'm not against diversity. I love diversity. This is just another side of diversity that you maybe never heard of. The concern here is that because it's called a Hispanic serving institution, is that the scapegoat is going to be the Latinx community. And that may be a problem. That's for you to decide. But this business of diversity was created due to the decreased funding of the state level because of Proposition 209 and the US Great Recession of 2008 federally. And this decreased funding has an impact on Hispanic serving institutions that contributed to the business of diversity, and business is booming. Hey, thanks for letting me share. You all stay safe and healthy out there, and I hope to see you at school soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ortuno. You actually have 5 questions here, but probably only time for one. Can you see them? Do you want to choose one?
I'd love to answer them all. Is there any way I could just put my email here? And if people want to ask me a question, you want to write me, you can write me. We could talk about this.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Sure.
I'll answer. Do you know what specifically these institutions did to qualify as HSIs? I can answer that one. So do I hit answer live?
Yeah.
Okay. Am I back on the screen here? All right. So
we can hear you, but I don't see your.
Oh, you're done.
Okay.
Oh no, shoot. It got rid of it, huh? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can definitely hear you.
Okay. So what these schools do, so this is what they do. So to be 25, you have to be 25% of your population to qualify, Latinx only, to qualify for federal money from the government. Or, so for example, say we hit 25% in 2013, we would have to send the federal government our numbers 2 years before, which means 2011. And what I'm finding out is over 80% of the schools were not 25% 2 years before to be a Hispanic serving institution, which means other people are benefiting from this. So what you can do is if you're not 25% before, the federal government has a clause. You can say that 50% of your population is poor, or if 50% of the overall student population isn't poor or need-based, then you can require a waiver for that year. But once you qualify for this, you compete for millions of dollars from Title IV funding, which gives you more money because you serve a minority-based institution, and Title V, meaning you get more money for the school. Now, does that money necessarily make its way back into the students or the professors? That's not sure. The interesting thing is of the 23 CSUs, I wrote them all. And over 30% did not know the first year that they became a Hispanic serving institution. I wrote the US Department of Education. I wrote the Chancellor's Office of the CSU and the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities. and nobody is keeping an official track when the HSI was officially recognized by the federal government as its first year of being a Hispanic serving institution. I have a lot of research on this. I'll be publishing this next year. It's huge. What I shared with you is only the tip of the iceberg.
Thank you so much. And do you want to say your email address so that people can email you to continue the dialogue?
Yeah, my email is david.ortuno, O-R-T-U-N-O, 1234 at csu.fullerton.edu. That's david.ortuno, R-T-U-N-O, 1234 at csu.fullerton.edu. All right, go Tuffy Titan.
Thank you so much. I hope you stick around for the other panelists. I am now gonna put you back into the audience. All right, and next we have someone from my home department. So Miguel Quinarte, and are you there, Miguel? I see two of you. Okay, good. I wasn't sure. I saw, okay, so I wasn't sure which one you're using. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We can't wait to hear about your research. Are you going to share, are you speaking, which is totally fine, or do you want to just, do you have a PowerPoint to share?
Yes, I have a PowerPoint.
Okay, so you can, I think you should be able to share your screen when you're ready.
Host disabled attendee screening. It says host disabled attendee screen sharing.
Okay, let me I might have accidentally, yep, I think I assigned your other identity code. Okay.
Awesome. Okay. Share.
So Miguel, as with everybody, when you have 1 minute left, I will hold up this sign, and time is up, I will hold up this sign.
Okay, awesome. 10 minutes, right?
Yep, 10 minutes.
Okay. Okay. Hola, everyone. So I wrote this piece originally, this paper, in one of our history department's Latin American history courses. And my professor, Dr. Stephen Neufeld, encouraged me to publish this in our student-based journal, the Wellabithan. And so I did, and then last year it got edited, and it was published in last year's edition. So for this piece, I wrote focusing on the 1968 Tlatelolco massacre in Mexico in 1968. But more specifically, I focus on how this incident, this tragedy, has been passed down as a collective memory among Mexicans since then. And at the time that I published this, I ended with 2018, which was the 50th anniversary, and how this event, and how people have been using this through popular culture methods and mediums. So a little bit of background of the event. So this happened in the 60s during the time that globally a lot of student movements were protesting inequalities and other social issues, such as what happened in Berkeley and Paris, and all the way to 1989 in Tiananmen Square in China. So Mexico was to host the Olympics in October of that year. It was under the government of Gustavo Díaz Ordaz, and there was already student movements in Mexico happening with some incidents, and both of these entities clashed on October 2nd, which I believe it was 10 days before the Olympics opened. I wanna give a fair warning. My next slide has a little bit of graphic images of violence, so feel free to look away. And so on that evening of October 2nd, the military came into the open town square, and they fired. There was a lot of chaos and people running away. And as you can see through the images, a lot of people perished. The government at the time claimed that only 40 people lost their lives, but other records think that it was to the 30th up to about 300 people. A lot of people were arrested and sent to Lord knows where. And it was military, also what they're called the granaderos, which is police, secret police. They actually wore gloves, white gloves, so the military can distinguish them from other people. After that, the government cleaned the space, rinsed the floor from blood and other evidence. And that was the last time that a big student protest took place. Immediately after that, the government, in collaboration with the press, because at the time, a lot of press were an extension of the government, tried to erase what happened. They you know, the reporters didn't interview activists. They didn't get the perspective. They just had a focus on the opposing view. So because of that, because of the instant silence, the surviving activists and sympathizers took matters into their own hands. As you can see in this slide right here, a lot of people start calling the press corrupted press. And if you can see this political cartoon depicting them as, you know, like the snake as vicious, lying, conniving, and being bribed by money. So these people took matters into their own hands. Even the university in Mexico City, where Tlatelolco is located, provided materials for them to, you know, artistically express their discontent. As you can see in this political cartoon on the left, it's depicting of a parody of the Olympics with the military. And again, the student activists felt it was really unfair and odd that why is the government promoting all these international events and investing all this money when there's inequality in the country and everywhere else is in, you know, in poverty or having the short end of the stick. Even some politicians, some other people sympathize with the movement. A quote that I put in the middle is by Octavio Paz, who was the ambassador to India. And he resigned literally 2 days after he found out of the what happened, and he sympathized with the students and other people in the activist movement. And people started writing poems and this disappointment and disgust of the event. Another medium that took place was literature, what was called still images. One of the prominent example is the image of this book that I have of from Elena Poniatowska, who is a prominent author in Latin American literature. And she has a background in journalism. And what she did was gather information, interviewing activists, and compose this book. She didn't want to create a narrative. She just wanted to collect accounts and even banners and signs from protesters, and for them to speak for themselves. She wanted them to be stilled and raw, and for readers to engage with them without any taint from the author herself. But this kind of backfired. Even the notion of still images from Poniatowska, because some people could not relate. Actually, a lot of people couldn't relate to the mediums that student activists were trying to reflect, because for starters, the media was not helping, depicting them as juveniles, delinquents, and putting blame on international politics. This was during the middle of the Cold War, and people thought, oh, these kids are being corrupted by international communists, because why would the government, or why would the country be in turmoil or in struggle if you know, that we're doing so well? You know, we are hosting something prestigious as the Olympics, and because of that, a lot of people thought this was not a national struggle or a social struggle. This was just privileged middle-class bourgeoisie children trying to start trouble. So because of this, some activism prevailed after this, after the first few years, but it was mostly dormant because not a lot of people were responding, and let alone positively. So years passed, so about 22 years passed until an incident that happened in Mexico that reawoke the memory of the massacre, and it was blending time with Mexican history. So this event, this massacre took place in a town square called La Plaza de Tres Culturas, which translates to the town square of three cultures, because monuments surrounding this open square have periods of Mexican history. So we have ruins of an Aztec temple that represents pre-Columbian Mexico. We have a cathedral, a Spanish cathedral representing colonial Mexico. And then we have modern buildings representing post-independence, national history of Mexico, right? But each of these elements have a theme of blood and sacrifice and massacre and carnage, okay, with the Aztecs creating sacrifice for their gods, and then with the conquest by the Spanish conquistadors. And then another incident happened in 1985 that also created a deja vu of these periods, and also of the Tlatelolco massacre in 1968, which was an earthquake. This earthquake happened in the center of Mexico that also reached Tlatelolco specifically. And this there was a pattern of tragedy, many people perishing, a government failing to respond and aiding, and it just led to the community to help out these people. So some people were having a deja vu of what happened. And also, the government, to create crowd control, they try to create a solidarity in bringing authors to recite pieces for this event to commemorate the victims of the earthquake. But what happened, it backfired, because a lot of these authors were veterans of the student movement, including Octavio Paz, and they recited poems they wrote about the student massacre, and this revived the memory, and this turned against the government, against for incompetence and failure to its people. This new generation of the movement was blending time. Again, they are not doing what the still images did in a previous generation, but like seeing how this relates to just a cycle of Mexican history, right? Artists were trying to blend in those spirits to see like this is a repeated incident, and how this is affecting not just, middle-class students in the 60s, but just Mexico. Thank you. And so you can see in this image, there was the artist is blending the incident. If you can see from the far right, the crumbling buildings from the earthquake, and then the police raids on the top of what it looks like a pyramid, and then a student with his torso open representing the Aztec times, and figures in the background are like praying to the heavens, as these are the victims, right? And then another monument was erected to really solidify the massacre. People are blending in again more concept of time with more narrative, with films and theater and documentaries, but still people were not seeing this as a national movement, just like a regional movement. It wasn't until the early 2000s that a documentary filmmaker by the name of Jimena Labra replicated this monument to commemorate the victims into different spots in Mexico, and seeing people's reactions and trying to take in a way the massacre from one area into different areas and to see people's reactions. So that it took you a step further in the 50th anniversary, with people are demonstrating demonstrations, protests, marches, also as part of an artistic approach to this, right? So in the 50th anniversary in 2018, all these people were commemorating this in different parts of Mexico. And also the government of Diaz Ordaz was also condemned. So an iconoclasm happened that took off anything that commemorated him or his administration. So names of public spaces, parks, schools, buildings that were taken off because artistically that is representing a massacre and the anti-Mexicanness. And as you can see in the last slides, how this is commemorated as a national event. You see a lot of Mexican emblems, even the Mexican flag in newspapers have taken at the time. More representation in pop culture still happens. It has even now reached internationally. As you can see, Amazon Prime had a miniseries in Spanish. So if you're interested, it has to be put in English subtitles. And so this continues to prevail. The government has not publicly apologized, even though the president at the time already passed away, but his administration, his survivors have not. And so, but one thing that did happen is this created a Mexican national outcry, right? And it wouldn't have happened without these other means of communication, such as visual performing arts and pop culture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miguel. Fascinating. I love how you were using history to look at historical time periods use of history. Would you mind sharing, because I don't think we have time to get to questions, we need to move into the last presenter. Could you do what David did before you and say your email address out loud in case people want to continue the dialogue with you?
Sure. So I'm gonna spell it out. My name is complicated, so it's Miguel and then Quirarte at csu.fullerton.edu. So it's like the emails we have from our portal. So my full name, Miguel Quirarte at Fullerton at csu.fullerton.edu.
Thank you so much. I am now going to put you back into the audience so that you can continue to enjoy the last talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up is Brianna Ruff. She is a graduate student in psychology. Brianna, hello.
Hi.
How are you doing today? Thank you so much for spending your time today telling us about your research. To introduce Brianna's topic, it is titled The Costly Avoidance of Pathogens pathogen scale, development and validation of a self-report measure. Will you be sharing your screen or just speaking?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So let me know if that works for you. Good.
Cool, I think it's visible. Oh wait, that's from that slide.
All right.
There we go.
And I will now hand it over to you. When you have 1 minute left, I will hold up this sign. And then when your time's up, I will hold up this sign.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is a project that I am working on in collaboration with Courtney, Kayla, and Dr. Lukaszewski here on campus. Sorry. Oh, wonderful. My PowerPoint decided to close out. Sorry. 1 second. All right, let's try this one more time. Okay. So yes, I'll just get right into it. So some background. Disgust is recognized as one of the basic human emotions, and disgust also has a universal facial expression that is observed cross-culturally, and it also evokes similar responses across individuals, such as nausea, vomiting, and sticking out your tongue as if to dispel something. So why study disgust? Well, it's a way to understand our shared human nature and how it varies, since it is a universal emotion, and also has implications of being associated with political orientation, personality traits such as neuroticism, and other behaviors and beliefs. And before we get into the rest of this, an assumption that we're going into this with is that natural selection is responsible for shaping our behavior, just like our physiology, such that over evolutionary time, behaviors that led to our ancestors to survive and reproduce more often were more likely to be passed on to the next generation. So this is kind of an evolutionary psychology approach. So what is disgust? Adaptive function, and that would be to avoid and minimize risk of pathogens. And in order for disgust to work accurately in this context, it must, one, identify people or things that contain pathogens, which was demonstrated with the 3 domains of disgust scale developed by Josh Tiber. So examples of some of the items that he had questions of were feces, someone with a wet cough, open wounds, etc. These are things that have that show signs of containing pathogens that we find disgusting. And his scale asked people like, how disgusting do you find this on a scale of 1 to 10? And it showed really good reliability and validity, saying that it's measuring what it's supposed to and people are responding consistently. And it showed that we are accurately identifying things that carry pathogens and associate disgust with them. Second, for this to work properly is for us to actually want to avoid these things. However, there's no scale that currently measures disgust avoidance. And thinking about disgust avoidance, avoiding pathogens usually comes with some kind of trade-off, right? So that could include skipping a meal or making some social costs, which I'll go into an example in a bit. So therefore, we shouldn't impose time and labor costs of avoiding things if it isn't necessary, because it's not just something we can easily do. So our current scale, the goal is to create a scale that measures the behavioral outputs of disgust, which are avoidance of pathogens, and 2, to understand factors that cause individual differences in disgust. So basically understanding why some people are more disgusted in general than other people. So one, looking at the scale, so we called it the costly avoidance of pathogen scale, where we have participants make a sacrifice in order to avoid something disgusting, which I'll show you an example of an item of that in a minute. And 2, we're examining factors that contribute to individual differences in pathogen avoidance. One of those we believe is perceived vulnerability to disease, such that higher pathogen threat should motivate an individual to be more disgusted, in the sense that when the threat of pathogens is really high, it's worth it cost of making some social costs a meal, because the odds of you getting sick and being vulnerable to a pathogen and probably not surviving are really high. So there we would expect you to be more disgusted and more avoidant. And then second is health locus of control. So having control over your health and environment should lead to higher levels of disgust, such that you can afford to make such a sacrifice in order to avoid. An example of this would be to imagine in a small hunter-gatherer society, they don't have access to clean water. And I mean, they're not disgusted by that fact. They would, gladly drink water that normally us from a first world country would probably not want to get near. And that's in the sense that, we can afford to be more disgusted because we have more control over our health and our environments, whereas they don't. So then again, it would be really costly to upregulate your disgust and avoidance and then not have access to clean drinking water or certain foods or different things like that. So it's kind of trying to find this trade-off balance of some happy median. So this is an example item from our scale. We created the scenarios using disgust stimuli from the 3 domains of disgust, such as open wounds, moldy food, feet, etc. So in this example, it's you are in a line at a buffet and the person in front of you has a wet mucousy cough and isn't doing a very good job at covering their mouth. What are you more likely to do? And below there's a scale that ranges from do nothing to do anything possible to avoid, with little examples underneath, just to make sure that participants are all thinking on the same page so that they know exactly what making a sacrifice means. And then there's little spaces in between to account for any other variants that people might be feeling. So here are our hypotheses or predictions. Number 1 is that the CAP scale will be a reliable and valid measure of individual differences in disgust motivated pathogen avoidance behavior. And that just goes along with the fact that this is a new scale. So we're trying to make sure that it's reliable and it's measuring what it's supposed to be measuring. And 2, these are the predictors. So perceived vulnerability to disease and health locus of control will be significant predictors of disgust avoidance measured by the CAP scale. And 3rd, we predict that the CAP scale will explain more variance in individual differences of disgust over and above the 3 domains of disgust scale alone. So for our participants, we gathered 291 people, 83 males, 201 females. The average age was about 25. It was an online survey, and we recruited people through the Cal State Fullerton Research Pool, through social media, primarily Reddit, and snowball sampling. The design of the study, at first they were presented with the 3 domains of discuss scale with pathogen discuss only. Then following that, they received our CAP scale that had 19 items. And then following that, perceived vulnerability to disease and health locus of control. And we put those on because we didn't want people thinking about those things and kind of being primed before thinking about like how disgusted they were. And then we excluded anybody that was under the age of 18 and did not complete the survey. Low, they're consistent in being low. And then second, that the CAP scale yields acceptable construct validity, and we came to this conclusion because it has significant positive correlations with another valid discuss measure, which is the 3 domains of discuss, which is circled in blue. So it's a 0.57 correlation at a less than a 0.01. And another factor associated with discuss, which is the perceived vulnerability to disease, and that had a correlation of 0.388 at a 0.01 as well. And then, so our prediction 2, perceived vulnerability to disease and health locus of control were significant predictors of pathogen avoidance measured by the CAP scale scores, such that when perceived vulnerability to disease increases, so does avoidance. And when health locus of control, when feelings of your health or feelings of control over your health increase, so does your avoidance as well. So that aligned perfectly with our hypothesis as well. And then lastly, we're interested in or understanding if our CAP scale is explaining more variance in individual differences than the 3 domains of discuss scale. So to examine that, we did a Steiger Z test that showed that the CAP scale is a stronger correlate of perceived vulnerability to disease than 3 domains of discuss, and a Steiger Z test, sorry, I can't even say it. What it basically does is the correlation circled in orange, it examines to see if there's a significant difference in the size of those correlations, and there was a significant difference between them. And of course, in column 1, that's the correlation with the costly avoidance of pathogen scale. So perceived vulnerability to disease is a stronger correlate with that. And then second, we have the costly avoidance of pathogen scale and health locus of control, which was our other predictor, had a significant correlation, whereas the 3 domains of discuss didn't have a significant correlation, thank you, with health locus of control, which is really interesting because again, it's the costly avoidance of pathogen scale is then explaining, or sorry, I forgot the circles, there you go. It's explaining some variation that the 3 domains of discuss isn't, or some contributing factor that's calibrating our discuss. And we do have evidence to believe that health locus of control is contributing to discuss by another scale that's about to come out. So it's not just that we're randomly grabbing something and saying it works. So some conclusions are that the CAP scale showed promising results as being more strongly related to an individual's perceived vulnerability to disease and health locus of control than the 3 domains of discuss, and therefore discuss avoidance more so than feelings of disgust is better at capturing how cues from the environment, such as our factors, affect individual differences in disgust. And some future directions. Obviously discuss is something really interesting to study right now, and especially with like the threat of pathogens being extremely high because of COVID-19, this pandemic going on. And that's like something that's so interesting to study with, or some differences with pathogens and humans is that we're constantly evolving, and COVID-19 is a novel disease, right? So we have to, upregulate our disgust and do social distance and do all these things, right, in order to basically protect ourselves and avoid the disease. So right now we're recollecting, like this data set was collected and examined January, and all the stuff with coronavirus didn't really take off until February. So we're collecting a new round of data to compare our first sample pre-coronavirus with this current sample post-coronavirus to see how everyone, or to see how an individual's perceived vulnerability to disease, their feelings of health locus of control change, and following that, their disgust and their disgust avoidance, or pathogen avoidance, sorry. Anyways, there's other things that are there too, but thank you so much.